Welcome to another episode of the Burning Desire Show. Today we have Terry Tucker alongside us, and welcome to the show, Terry.
Thanks, Charles. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Absolutely. So, your story, from what I read anyway, starts you being an NCAA Division I basketball player. Was the college called the Citadel? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, but I like to go a little bit before, if possible, into kind of your schooling prior to college. I take it you were clearly a sports person. You were into sports back in the day. That was a passion of yours.
It really was. You can't tell this from my voice or from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I was able to play college basketball despite having 3 knee surgeries. And I'm the oldest of 3 boys. I have a brother who's 6'7", who was a pitcher on the University of Notre Dame's baseball team here in the U.S.
Wow.
And then I have another brother who's 6'6", who was drafted in the National Basketball Association, professional basketball here in the States. And then my dad was 6'5". So I kind of joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, there wasn't a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on whatsoever. But yeah, we were all athletes. And my parents kind of did the divide and conquer parenting. It would be like, all right, Terry's got a game over here, so mom will go to that, and Larry's got to practice over here, so dad will go to that. So we were always running in 15 different directions because of sports.
It's really interesting because I think certainly I remember growing up, sports kind of more in the UK, particularly in schools and stuff, it's more of a pastime, right? It's a recreational thing. There isn't a huge impetus from parents or from anyone to kind of go down it. I think the only sport that possibly just about fits the category is what we call it football, you call it soccer, where right. but even then, you start and you play a little bit, and then you get, we call it scouted, and maybe you'll go play for Manchester United or a local team or a professional team, but as a schoolboy, and that's kind of how it works. But there's certainly not, or there was when I go, it might have changed a bit, but there's not a big appetite nor kind of system in place whereby sports leads to scholarships to colleges, and it's just a large part of life. And I think that's a shame, actually, because sports, you learn so much in sports as to how life is, whether it's a team sport, individual sport. We'll come on to, of course, the pain and suffering, all those different things, losses, how to deal with failure, all those different things, and practice and discipline. And I think it is actually a shame in the UK that we don't put enough emphasis on it in the right way. I've also seen as well, when I was in the States, it was an under 10s or very young junior US Open qualifying event, and the kid who was playing didn't win. Someone's got to lose, so this kid loses, and the parent, I think it was a father, I don't know, threw the water cooler at this kid, the whole, all the water, all the rest of it. I'm like, what? This is ridiculous. I think there is elements of where it does go too far, but going back to my original point, I think it's super interesting. I always find that in America that you guys put such a big importance on sports growing up.
Yeah, and in all honesty, I'll be the first to tell you, and if my wife was on here now, she could probably go on for about 4 hours about how horrible the state of youth sports is now, because every parent thinks their kid is the next LeBron James or, the next great baseball player or basketball player, whatever. And they're not. I mean, the odds are so infinitesimal that anybody's going to get a scholarship to play it in college, let alone to go on and play it professionally. And our daughter went through that. It's called AAU here. And our daughter got my height. Fortunately or unfortunately, she's about 6'2", but she was recruited to play basketball in college and was on these AAU teams that traveled all over the United States in the summer. They would start out on the West Coast and kind of work their way back to where they started. And it's just like a meat market. You pay money to these coaches. Some coaches care, but a lot of coaches don't. It's just, they're just taking you there. Yeah, you 5 go out and play. And I'm not trying to teach you, as you said, you can learn a lot from sports, but I'm not trying to teach you any of that stuff. I'm just trying to get you a scholarship to college. And that's all parents care about. And they put their kids out there to such a degree that the kids don't have fun with it, especially young kids. I mean, a 10-year-old kid should be out having fun with sports, not being like, I got to be so competitive because I might get a scholarship, 10 years from now to go to college. I think the pendulum has swung way to the other side, and hopefully it'll swing back somewhere in the middle.
So when you were growing up, it was far more. It was just you loved it, you had fun with it, and that led you to play in college. That basically what happened.
Yeah, I was very lucky. When I started playing, I was living in Columbus, Ohio, here in the States, and I happened to be on the same basketball team as the son of the assistant coach of Ohio State University. Okay. And I didn't think much of that, but it gave me access to going to summer camps with the head coach at Ohio State and things like that I think gave me a leg up, I guess, that maybe I wouldn't have had otherwise. So, and that was just luck. We happened to be on the same team. And so it was, I'll never forget this. I went in one day and it was a little cracker box gym that we played in. It doubled as a lunchroom and an auditorium and a gymnasium. I mean, it was everything. And I walked in behind this player, his dad, and he was on a recruiting trip with the tallest man I had ever seen. His name was Luke Whitty. He was like 7'2". And he had a duck to get through the door. And I was like, oh my God, I was like 9 years old. I was just so enthralled with that, but was very fortunate that I was able to have that opportunity and took advantage of it. And that kind of really started my passion and love for playing basketball.
So NCAA, is that National College Athletic Association? I guess, is that what it means or stands for?
Yeah, National Collegiate Athletic Association. And that's the governing body over all collegiate sports.
Okay. And Division I is that the creme de la creme of college basketball? Basically?
Yeah, it's Division I, Division II, and Division III, and it has to do a lot with like the number of scholarships that a Division I school can offer is much more than a Division II school, and then Division III schools don't offer any kind of athletic scholarships. They can offer academic or needs scholarships, but they don't offer athletic scholarships.
So, did you get a scholarship to the Citadel in that case?
I did.
Yeah. So how does that actually fundamentally work? Like you're playing basketball in school, and you're good at it. Of course, you get spotted and you get an offer. Is that how it basically works?
Yeah, you have coaches that are interested in you, and for me, it's a little bit different now with social media and things like that, and being able to send videos and things like that. When I was doing it, there was no social media, so. Somebody would tell a coach, hey, you ought to check this Tucker kid out, Marist, and they would come and watch you, and they might come and watch you in some summer leagues that you were in. And then they would develop a relationship with you. They would call you, they would send you letters and things like that. And then you could take, I want to say it was 4 official visits where you could go to a school and the school could pay for it. They pay for your airfare, they pay for your lodging, they'd show you around the school, meet the other players and things like that. And then if they were that interested in you, they would make you an offer. We'd like to offer you a scholarship to play here and that. And then if you were good enough, you usually had multiple offers, and then you had to make a decision which one you wanted to go to. And I'll never forget, our daughter was in that same boat and decided, she had 4 or 5 schools in on her. And she was like, okay, I'm going to make my decision. And she ended up playing for the United States Air Force Academy basketball team here in the States. And I said, okay, you made your decision. Now you're going to have to let these other coaches know. And she's like, I'll just send them a text. I'm like, no, you won't. You're going to pick up the phone and call them, because this is about a relationship. They've come to see you. We've been out to their colleges. We've had dinner with them, all that kind of stuff. And she was, kids today don't know how to talk to people.
Yeah.
And she was very uncomfortable. We had to role play it. And there were several coaches that were at lesser schools academically and lesser schools athletically that kind of got mad at her and yelled at her, like, what do you mean you're not coming here? And we were talking about it afterwards. I said, well, what did that tell you? And, she's a kid. She didn't know, like, what do you think, Dad? And I said, well, I don't think that coach had your best interest in mind. It was all about what you could do for them, but not how they were going to be able to reciprocate and do something for you as well. So, yeah, I mean, that's just a good lesson to learn, as a 17-year-old kid about, what are the, why are people recruiting you? What do they want from you? And what do they expect from you? And then what do you expect from them?
So what does it mean that she's playing for the United States? Did you say Air Force, did you say?
Yeah. So the branches of the military, the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force have colleges, have universities that you go through them. It's very militaristic. You go through boot camp, you do all this kind of stuff. It's very hard academically. I don't care what your degree is, pretty much you're going to get an engineering degree. And then you graduate and you become an officer in the military. So if you go to West Point or Army, you graduate, become an officer in the Army. Navy, you can do Marines and the Navy. And then the Air Force, now you can do the Air Force, or we have a new branch of the military, the Space Force. And that's where our daughter is. Our daughter is an officer in the Space Force now. But it's just like going to college, and they have sports teams, football teams, basketball teams, baseball teams, et cetera. And so it's great school, great opportunity. And she was fortunate enough to do that and to graduate.
I have to ask what an officer in the Space Force actually does, right? Because that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, basically, what she would tell you is she flies satellites. So she controls military satellites from the ground that are up in space. And that's pretty much, that's all I know about what she does, because she has one of the highest top secret clearances in the military and really can't tell us anything about what she does.
Wow, that's super interesting. Anyway, back to your story. So like the Citadel, if you were to go there and pay for tuition, like what is the value of the scholarship you received rather, in monetary terms, if you just pay for it, if that makes sense?
I don't know what it is today. I mean, it's been 40 years since I graduated from college. So I mean, it was not nearly as expensive as it is now. And the other thing that the way colleges work here in the United States is, if you say live in the state of California, and you can go to California colleges for a lower rate than say somebody who lives in another state and comes to California. So there's an in-state tuition and an out-of-state tuition. Out-of-state is obviously more expensive than that. So I don't know. I'm going to say it was probably at the time maybe $25,000 a year, room and board, books, tuition. It was a military school, so they gave us uniforms as well. So I'm going to say about 25. So maybe $100,000 over the course of my 4 years.
Wow. And so how much of that time were you spending like practicing for basketball, and what did you learn from that? And of course, were you trying to get to the NBA? Was that the ambition, or you just wanted to see where it went at this point?
I mean, I certainly at one point wanted to go to the NBA. Unfortunately, I had 3 knee surgeries in high school. So I was just fortunate enough to play in college. I mean, I probably shouldn't have with my knee. So I knew there was probably no way I was going to go play professionally. But you spend a lot of time. I mean, it's hard enough to do academics and basketball. And then now you're at a military college. So now you've got a third rung of that stool that, now you're doing the military portion of it as well. So you had to be really good at budgeting your time and taking your books with you on the road and things like that. I remember when our daughter played basketball at the Air Force Academy, when they would travel with tutors. So they would set time aside during their road trips where, okay, for these 2 hours, it's going to be an academic period where you're going to study and do homework. And we've got these tutors that can help you because there's so much math and so much science that you have to take. It's a requirement to graduate. So they would actually bring tutors with them to help the kids because they were missing class. And so it was a tremendous experience. I was fortunate enough to play against Michael Jordan, probably one of the greatest basketball players, my senior year, his freshman year at the University of North Carolina. So I got to play against some great talent, had a lot of fun, still am in touch with a lot of the players that I played with, and even some of the coaches as well. Wow,
that's amazing. So when you were playing against Michael Jordan, was he known at that point is he noticed as being very talented, or was he just another guy?
I mean, he was good, but he was a freshman in college. I mean, he really hadn't, although that was when I played against him, it was 1982. And that was the year that his team North Carolina won the National Collegiate Athletic Association basketball championships, but they were the best college team in the United States. And he hit a jump shot. He hit a shot almost at the buzzer to win that. And, that kind of started okay, this is the Michael Jordan. This is the incredibly talented, incredibly competitive individual. And kind of a funny story, I mentioned my youngest brother, who was a baseball pitcher. He ended up becoming a basketball coach in Chicago, one of the bigger cities in the United States. And he actually coached Michael Jordan's two sons, and has been to Michael Jordan's home. He's met him numerous times. Jordan and his wife were incredibly great people. They didn't try to, hey, I'm Michael Jordan, I'm going to tell you how to coach this team. They're like, you know what, coach, you coach the team. We're just going to be mom and dad over here. So super individuals, and it was a great experience for my brother as well.
It's something I talk to some people about that, again, in the sports world. Of course, you mentioned Michael Jordan. I'm sure there's some others that made the NBA. When you're playing, like, again, do you notice the difference between those that makes the NBA and those that don't? Is it just pure skill? Is it timing? Is it a mixture of things? Is it a dedication to the craft? Like, what would you say takes people from collegiate, like Division I, through to NBA, and those that do and don't make it?
Excuse me. I think it's sort of all of that. I mean, you have to be incredibly lucky to make it to the NBA. I mean, the percentage, I don't even know what the percentage is, probably less than 1%. I want to say it's less than 7% of high school kids ever make it to the varsity, in high school, not alone to go on to college and then to go on professionally. So the odds are so stacked against you of ever doing that. And you really have to commit to it. There was a player who recently passed away in a helicopter accident by the name of Kobe Bryant, and he played for the Los Angeles Lakers. And I remember hearing a story about Bryant that one day he was playing in an NBA game, and he took a shot and somebody hit him on the elbow and he missed the shot, and the team lost the game. Well, they lost the game. They went into the locker room, and afterwards he grabbed a manager and he said, "Come with me." And he went into the gym, to a practice gym, and he shot thousands of shots. And all the manager did was hit him on the elbow, shoot, hit him on the elbow, hit him on the elbow, hit him on the elbow, because he never wanted to be in a position where he missed another shot because somebody hit him on the elbow. Now, that's an attention to detail that most people don't have in whatever they do for a living. But he was so obsessed with being the greatest that he was willing to put in that kind of time and effort so that would never happen again.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And you see that across all sectors of successful people in whatever category they work in, verticals. So you get to, I presume you go to college, you think maybe this NBA thing might happen. Then at what point in time do you go, right, that's not, and therefore you move on to this marketing role at Wendy's, which for people who are not from the US is basically like a McDonald's fast food chain, right? But one better phrase.
Yeah, I knew I wasn't going to play professionally. I didn't play that much. I had a fourth knee surgery right before my senior year in college. Kind of missed the first half of the season. Was lucky to play at the end. And so now you've got to, take your education, take your life experience, and do something with it. And in 1982, the economy in the United States was not that great. So I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Well, that's not true. I knew what I wanted to do, but it was a matter of when I graduated from college, my father, who was kind of my hero, was dying of cancer, as was my grandmother. They both lived, we lived under the same roof. And so I had a choice. I wanted to be in law enforcement. I wanted to be a police officer. My grandfather was a Chicago police officer back in the 1920s and things like that. I wanted to follow in his footsteps, but he was also shot in the line of duty with his own gun. And my dad always remembered the stories my grandmother told of the knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us. Your husband's been shot. And I mean, let's face it, trauma medicine in 1935 was not nearly what trauma medicine is today. So when I expressed an interest in going into law enforcement, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to go to college, you're going to major in business, you're going to get a great job, you're going to get out, get married, have 2.4 kids and live in this. I mean, my dad had my entire life planned out. but it was the life my father wanted me to live. So I had a choice when I graduated from college. I could say, sorry, Dad, I know you're sick and dying, but I'm going to go blaze my own trail. Or, and this is exactly what I did, out of love and respect for him, I said, okay, I'll find a job in business. So I was able to find that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's. And then after that, I ended up going into hospital administration. And I sort of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited till my father passed away, and then I followed my dreams. And so that's what I did. I mean, if you look at my resume, my first two jobs are in business. And then I made this major pivot to go into law enforcement.
So you went into law enforcement mainly because your grandfather had been in law enforcement. What else about the kind of profession did you like interest you, I suppose?
I think it was just wanting to help, wanting to serve. It was always something that attracted me regarding that. It wasn't, because I could carry a gun and I could arrest people and, I could do all that stuff. I was on the SWAT team as a hostage negotiator, and we would train every month at the police academy. So from time to time, I would get to talk to the recruits that were at the academy. And I used to tell them, they're going to spend 6 months here teaching you how to use all these tools on your belt, your handcuffs, your gun, your stick, your mace, all that stuff. But the biggest tools that you bring to this job are your brain and your mouth, and how you use those. If you use them effectively, a lot of times you won't have to use these tools that are on your belt. And, I used to tell them, if you're here to, pardon my French, to kick ass and take names, this is the wrong job for you, because you're eventually going to run into somebody out there on the street that's going to be bigger, stronger, and tougher than you. And not only are you going to get hurt, the rest of us are probably going to get hurt as well. So it was something that I just felt that I needed to do. It was in my heart. It was in my soul. And I always tell young people, especially now, that, if there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you want to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things that you're going to regret are not going to be the things you did. They're going to be the things you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to do them. So I was a 37-year-old rookie police officer, which by most accounts is pretty old to be getting into that job, but it was still in my heart. It was still a passion for mine, and it was something I wanted to pursue.
So tell more about the SWAT hostage negotiation. Like, how did you get involved with that? And can you talk about some of the scenarios and what you learned from there, and how things play out in real life compared to the movies, I suppose?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. I had always, in my life, had wanted to be associated with the best. And in most law enforcement agencies, the individuals, the officers that are on the SWAT team are the best, and they get the best equipment and they get the best training and things like that. So when they had an opportunity on the SWAT team for a negotiator, I put in for it like everybody else. And I had to do a physical fitness test. I had to meet with a psychologist. I had to go through interviews and all that. And I was eventually chosen to do that. And it's funny because I don't know, I think it was in the 1990s. There was a movie that came out that starred Samuel L. Jackson, and it was called The Negotiator. And, Samuel L. Jackson was this guy, and he's negotiating with all these, hardened criminals that are doing all this kind of stuff. And people always ask me, is that the way it is? No, that is totally not the way it is whatsoever.
So surprised.
It doesn't work that way. Now, to a point, it does. So the way it works is there is one person negotiating with whatever the situation is. And then there's a person sitting right next to him, another negotiator, that's listening to the conversation, but not saying anything, and passing the primary negotiator notes. And then there's a group of 3 or 4 other negotiators that sort of work in the crowd. That's like, why are we here? What started this? What's going on? Tell us about him or her or whoever is the barricaded or the person we're negotiating with. And so this may have been a fight with the guy's mother. Let's say he had a fight with his mother and he barricaded himself in the house with a gun. And so you might get a note that says, don't talk about his mother. So you're like, oh, okay. So, you try to stay away from the mother. So it's a collective team effort to get somebody out. And about 90% of the time, we are successful of getting the hostage. We never lost a hostage, but there were times, about 10% of the time, where the person who took the hostage or the person who was barricaded where they actually said, you know what, no, I'm not coming out. I'm going to end my life. I'm going to, whatever. Usually it was they shot themselves and while that was always tragic, and I don't mean to sound callous with this, I never lost any sleep over that, because the way I looked at it was, whatever we were, if you were talking to me and your house was surrounded by the police, you were probably having the worst day of your life. And whatever caused that to occur probably had been festering for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And to bring me, a total stranger, into the mix and say, okay, solve this, make this work, make this good, really wasn't fair to any of us as negotiators. But we did the best we could, and we trained with a psychologist, and we did all those kind of things. And I guess I learned two important things. One was the importance of trust. You had to have, this was a relationship. This was just like, a boss or subordinate, or a husband and wife, or a parent and child. You were creating a relationship with this person who was barricaded. And we never lied to these people. There were times where they would be like, hey, I'll come out, but you got to promise me I'm not going to jail. And we would have to say, well, I'm sorry, when you come out, you are going to jail. And then we would try to deflect the conversation to something positive. So trust was a big part of that. It was one thing I learned. And the other thing I learned was, as a police officer, 99% of what we did was face-to-face with another person, whether we were pulling them over for speeding and giving them a ticket, or responding on a radio run for a fight or a domestic situation. It was always face-to-face. But as negotiators, we weren't with the person. I mean, we could be blocks away talking on a phone. We could be between a locked door talking to the person. So we had to figure things out based on what people were saying, what they weren't saying, and how they were saying it. And there were many times where we'd be over here, for 2 hours talking about something, when the real problem was over here, and we had not even gotten to, to what the real problem was. And the way I talk about it is, we've all been to the park and, been on a seesaw or a teeter-totter and that kind of thing. When we started negotiating with a person, their emotional end was way up in the air and their rational end was down at the ground. And over time, by asking them open-ended questions and getting them to burn off a lot of that emotional energy, that teeter-totter comes to equilibrium. And hopefully over some more time, the rational end will be up in the air and the emotional end will be down on the ground. Because let's face it, we all make better decisions when we're using our rational brain as opposed to our emotional brain. So, I mean, that's a little bit of how we did it and what went on, but it was a lot of fun, and I worked with some great people.
It's a really interesting way of, funnily enough, when I worked a corporate role in Tesco, which is like Walmart equivalent in the UK and also around the world, they talked about the equivalent of this, but emotionally charged, and I think they call it logically charged, but the exact same thing. When you're dealing with a conflict scenario, whether it's a colleague, whether it's a customer, whatever the case may be, and how you diffuse it to kind of find the equilibrium. But that seesaw analogy I've just written down, I think it's really, really interesting, actually, an interesting way of looking at it. Back to the psychology, there's two things interest me. The psychology, well, there's actually three. I'm interested to understand what sort of screening you had to go through to be a hostage negotiator, one. Two, some of the kind of the tenets, I suppose, of how you would, figure someone's psychology out and what makes them tick and how to diffuse the situation. And the third one is, again, for yourself personally, is when I've asked another officer this before, actually, but when you don't know what you're going to responding to, it's always different things. So, you've got to be adaptable. But then when you come home and you're dealing with your family, your wife and your kids, like, how do you switch off and become the father and not, I've had a really tough day because X, Y, and Z? So that's quite a long question. There you go.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with the last one. I mean, my family was always my sanctuary. I mean, I have been. It's just my wife and daughter and I. But cops are notorious for after a shift is over, hey, let's go out to the bar. Let's go out to the pub and have a drink. And I was always like, no, I don't want to do that. That's not something that interests me. I want to go home and I want to be with my family, because that grounded me. I think the other thing that grounded me was my faith. I have a very strong faith in God. And so I realized that I was doing the best that I could. And I did. And I always did that. And it really wasn't up to me. I mean, life is about choices. Life is about the choices that we make. And yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm trying to help you, but how this ends is up to you. It's not really up to me. I'm doing the best I can to get it to end peacefully, and then you come out and nobody gets hurt. But that's up to you. I mean, if you have a gun, then you can use it on yourself. You can. I'll never forget this one time we were negotiating with this individual, and it started at about 9 o'clock at night. And this individual wanted to commit suicide, so he slit his wrists. Well, that didn't work. And then he thought, well, for some reason, it would be a good idea to turn the gas on the oven and put my head in the oven. Like, well, okay, that didn't work either. So he ended up calling one of his family members, and the family member was smart enough to call the police. And we got there and we're talking with him, and I'm negotiating with him, and he's got a gun now. And it's probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning now. So he was tired, and when you're emotional, it drains a lot of energy out of you. Yeah. So, plus it's 4 o'clock in the morning, you're tired anyway. Yep. And so he finally said, I want to come out. And I'm like, great, just put the gun down, come on out. And when you come out, I'll come down to the scene and we'll talk face to face. And he's like, great, I'd really like that. And so I said, but don't hang up the phone. Just take the phone with you. Well, he ends up hanging up the phone, which isn't out of the ordinary, because when a conversation's over, we're just geared toward hanging up the phone. And all of a sudden, one of the tactical officers comes on the radio and says, we heard a gunshot. And I thought, he didn't. He shot himself. He did. Shot himself in the head. But he shot himself at an angle where the bullet hit his scalp, or hit his skull, went underneath his skin, went around the other side of his scalp, and came out the other side. Never penetrated his brain or anything.
Oh, wow.
You have to laugh at that, but that to me was like God was saying, nope, we don't want you. Not your time yet. You've tried 3 times, not going to happen. And that, wow. Yeah. So while it was tragic, fortunately he lived. He ended up, surviving that. Wow. So I guess that's one way. So in terms of how we got on, you basically apply. You apply for an opening, and there's a screening process. Part of it is a physical fitness test. You have to run, you have to do push-ups, sit-ups, and that kind of thing. Do you make it in the appropriate time? And then there are interviews, and then you interview with a psychologist, and you take all kinds of written tests and all that kind of stuff. And then there are more interviews, and then they make a decision. And then you start through the training. And I remember, I'll never forget my first day. I'm there, and we train with each other. We practice being the bad guy and the hostage negotiator and all that stuff. And this was just a person who had taken a hostage behind a locked door, and the hostage kept saying, help me, help me, help me, And I, as a negotiator, I focused all my attention on the hostage. I talked to the hostage the whole time. And this is how green I was. I didn't know anything. And they're like, he said, this is going to sound cruel, but leave the hostage out of it. You don't want to focus on the hostage. You want to focus on the hostage taker. Even if the hostage is screaming and, help me, forget about the hostage, focus on the hostage taker. And so that was the start of the learning. And I remember one time we had a 15-year-old kid who had barricaded himself with a gun, and we had tried everything, and nothing was working. And so we were like, hey, we'll call you back in a minute. And we got the group together, and we're like, I don't know what to do. What do you think we should do? And finally, one of the older guys was like, let's scare him. He's a kid. He's 15 years old. Let's scare him. And so we had the tactical guys break a window and throw in a flashbang grenade. It's not a grenade that explodes that is going to hurt you. It just produces a really loud bang and a very bright light. And so we're like, well, yeah, what the heck? We've tried everything else. Let's try to scare the kid. So they crack the window, they throw in the grenade. Within like 10 minutes, this kid was out. That worked. We had to be a parent. We had to like, hey, you're a 15-year-old kid. We're going to be your mom and dad. Get the heck out of here. Let's go. Okay. That's what we needed.
That's awesome. And so I've read that you then relocated to Texas. This was in Cincinnati, the whole policing experience.
Correct.
Did you just get to a point after a number of years where you'd scratched that itch and it was time to move on to something else, or because you moved geographically, you just tried something else? Like, why did you not continue in the police force elsewhere, I suppose?
So we moved because of my wife's job. My wife had always been the primary breadwinner, and she lost her job in Cincinnati, wasn't able to find another one, and found one in Texas.
Yep.
So I had to leave the police department. And the way law enforcement works in the United States is each of the 50 states have a commission that, the Ohio Police Officers Training Association in Ohio governs all law enforcement. Well, the Ohio commission isn't the same as the Texas commission. So you can't just take your certification in Ohio and go to another state and apply. You basically have to start all over again.
Right.
And I was in, my mid to going on late 40s. And I'm like, I'm not going back through the police academy. I'm not going to start out as a rookie working a night shift and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, no, I can do other things. And so I started a school security consulting business. And I also started coaching girls high school basketball in Texas. So that was, I was more than the gun and the badge. And unfortunately, I worked with police officers who their entire identity was tied to their job, tied to what they did. And I loved being a cop. I thought it was my passion, but it wasn't who I was. And so I was able to do other things based on my background, my training, and my experience.
It's so interesting, actually, because it's something that's actually dawned on me quite recently about what you've just mentioned of your vocation or your work, what you spend most time on, it does not define you. I think a lot of people think it does, because in today's world, you go to anywhere you meet someone for the first time, and for a categorical fact, the question is going to be, oh, so what do you do? And it's not what do you do creatively, what do you do for leisure, what do you do in the gym? It's what do you do to earn money? That's pretty much, and then people size you up and go, oh, you do something that's a service, or oh, you're wealthy because you're a business person. Like it's really interesting that in today's world, unfortunately, I look at it, I think it's quite a sad thing. People then go, oh, teacher, therefore this is the box they go in. Lawyer, therefore this box. Doctor, oh, brilliant, because they save lives. Could be the worst, most horrible person ever, but they're a doctor, so they're smart and they save lives. So even if they're a plastic surgeon, this doesn't matter. So yeah, it's interesting. I think it's really interesting as to not allowing to define you. I came across this term because I was someone's interviewing for their podcast and asked me for a 2-sentence bio. And the word I was actually looking for was a polymath, because that's very much what I am. I'm interested in lots of different things, and I research and whatever. But I couldn't find that word. Just mental block. So I Googled someone interested in multiple things, and the word that came out was a multi-potentialite. Never ever come across it, right? Ever.
Yeah.
But when you look into what it is, it's really interesting. It's someone that has multiple creative pursuits, that likes to get, investigate different things. So for me, it's that I've got this podcast. I've got my weekly, it's called Burning Issues, where I talk about topics that I think is interesting at the point. I've got my book reviews that I do. I've got my businesses, and it very much defines that. That's more. I used to think, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, which is true. I am. But you then dress in a certain way. You then because if you're a tech entrepreneur, you can't wear a suit, shirt, and tie, because tech entrepreneurs don't wear suits, shirt, and ties. They wear black t-shirts, or I'm wearing black t-shirt now. But it's interesting, isn't it? That you almost encompass that, because you think, oh well, if Zuckerberg's wearing this, and that he's a tech entrepreneur, then if I want to embody that, I have to wear that and do that and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's a very interesting point you raised. Yeah.
It really is. And I kind of do the opposite. Like when I meet new people, the question I'll usually ask them is, what do you do when you're not working?
That's a great
I want to see, who are you outside the job? What kind of,
question.
what do you do? What are your interests? Because I think we probably have, if you said, I was a tech guy, I can barely turn my cell phone on in the morning. So I'm probably I don't have a lot in common with that, but you like sports. Okay, I like sports. Let's talk about that. That's something outside of your job. So I always ask people what they do when they're not working.
That's really smart. I'm going to take that. I like that very much. I think it's and as you say, that's more when you've got your free time. That's where you can actually sense, well, is someone just watching Netflix all day and they do nothing? If someone hasn't got much conversation there, it's oh, okay. Even if it turns out there's some billionaire, this, if they're not interesting, or not anything interesting that you're interested in, then yeah, it makes for a very boring conversation, I think.
Right.
That's super interesting. So then your life takes a bit of, well, a huge kind of turn or spiral, or I'll let you kind of explain what happens.
Yeah, 2012, I'm a girls' high school basketball coach in Texas, and I have a callus that broke open on the bottom of my foot right below my third toe. And initially, I don't think a lot of it because as a basketball coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after it not healing for a couple of weeks, I went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine, and he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern, but he sent it off to have it examined by a pathologist. Right. And then 2 weeks later, I get a call from him. And as I mentioned, he was a friend of mine, and the more difficulty he was having explaining what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming, until finally he just kind of laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have a rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And I recommend you go we have a cancer hospital here in the United States called MD Anderson, probably one of the best in the world, to be treated because your cancer is so rare. And so I did. I had the bottom of my foot cut out. I had all the lymph nodes in my groin removed. And then when I healed, my oncologist, my doctor, put me on a weekly injection of a drug called interferon to try to keep the disease from coming back. The side effects of interferon for me was that I had severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. I lost 50 pounds during my therapy. I used to joke that I felt I was so skinny that I could go hang gliding on a Dorito, one of the chips and stuff like that. I mean, I was just constantly nauseous, fatigued, chilled. Even my ability to taste food diminished, and I constantly ached. And I took those weekly interferon injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week for 5 years. And that wasn't a cure. That was just to try to keep it from coming back. 2017, I had to stop the interferon because it became so toxic to my body that I ended up in the intensive care unit with a fever of 108 degrees, which usually is not compatible with being alive, but somehow I survived that. Wow. 2018, had my left foot amputated because of the cancer. 2019, the cancer worked its way up my leg into my shin, had 2 more surgeries. And then 2020, an undiagnosed tumor in my ankle area grew large enough that it fractured my tibia, my shin bone. And my only recourse right in the middle of the pandemic was to have my left leg amputated above the knee. And I also found I had tumors in my lungs, and I'm being treated for those. And I know that sounds like a very ugly and dark story, and it is. But in all honesty, I think cancer has made me a better human being.
Can you, I mean, obviously painful might be not, but explain, you mentioned a little bit about how frightened you were when you initially found out that it was something that your doctor friend had never seen in his career. When you're like, is there like, as people talk about in lots of different parts of life, which is where things are more difficult, is there a period of like, oh, this can't be the true, like this isn't really a thing, it's not so serious, and then to a point like, oh, this is really like, do you go through different phases of emotions where you kind of like, what are you thinking and feeling? Let's go with that, like throughout this period of time.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It does. I mean, there are stages of, I guess, what we would all consider grief that you go through. And I did, I was like, wait a minute, there's no way I could have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. I've eaten right. I've done, and then you get mad, and then you start bargaining with God. And I mean, you go through all these emotions, and then and for me, it was like, well, this sucks, but I'm going to have to embrace this suck, and I'm going to have to use it. And these are the cards that I've been dealt, and I need to play these cards to the best of my ability. I mean, my life certainly changed, and it, it's been 10 years now that I've been dealing with this. And you just have to get to a point in your life where you realize that, you know what, I don't like this, but I'm going to have to do the best I can with it. And people, especially here in the United States, we're great about not taking responsibility for our own success and happiness. If we've got a goal, we start down a path towards that goal, and then we butt up against an impediment. And then we're like, oh, no, something got in my way. I'm going to quit. I'm going to give up. And then we look to blame somebody. It's like, oh, I'm going to blame my boss or my parents or my station in life. And I've had people ask me, who do you blame because you got cancer? And I kind of look at it, what do you mean, who do I blame? Well, you got to blame somebody. Well, a couple of summers ago, I had all 88 genes that doctors either know or suspect cause all different forms of cancer. I had a genetic test of all those genes, and I have no mutations in any of my genes, which begs the question, why did I get this? And my doctor's like, I can't tell you that, Terry. I don't know why you got it, but you got it. And then people are like, well, do you blame God? And I sort of joke. I'm like, no, I don't think God got up on a Tuesday morning, checked his to-do list and said, Terry Tucker, cancer today. I don't think that happened at all. But so I don't blame anybody because I got cancer. I got it. This is my life, and I'm going to have to do the best I can with it.
So interesting and inspiring. And when I was looking again at your bio, there are 4, maybe you'd call them tenets or mantras that you have. Yeah. Do you want to go through those and explain, how you came to those and what they are?
Sure. So I've learned these over these last 10 years, and I call them the 4 truths. I look at them as sort of the bedrock of my soul. They're just a good place to start to build a life off of. And they work for me. I'm not going to say they work for other people. And as I give them to you, if they do work for you, use them. If 1 or 2 works for you, use those 1 or 2, develop your own, whatever you do, but these work for me. So the first one is, and I have them on a Post-it note here that I see, they're 1 sentence each. I see them multiple times a day. So they constantly get reinforced in my brain. So the first one is control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. And I mentioned earlier that I had 3 knee surgeries in high school. And when I went back playing basketball, my brain was putting all this negative thought into my mind. Things like, hey, you had 3 knee surgeries, so you're probably a step slower on the court and coaches aren't going to want to recruit you. So all this negative stuff was going in there. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm still playing at an elite level and coaches are still contacting me. No, this is wrong. I got to change the narrative. I've got to change that negative into something positive. So that's the first one. The second one is you need to embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger individual. The way I look at that is we're all going to experience pain in our lives. And it doesn't have to be cancer pain or even an illness. You could flunk a test at school or break up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend or not get the promotion at work that you think you believe or that you think you deserve. Pain is inevitable. Suffering, on the other hand, suffering's optional. Suffering's what you do with that pain. Do you use it to make you a stronger person, or do you wallow in it and feel sorry for yourself and want other people to feel sorry for you? And don't get me wrong, Charles. I mean, I'm a human being. There's no S on my chest. I don't wear a cape and fly around with magical powers. I mean, I have bad days. I have days that I cry, I have days that I get down, but I just don't let myself stay there. I use the pain that I experience instead of running from it. I flip it inside. I burn it as fuel. I use it as energy to make me a stronger person. That's number 2.
Actually, on that note, you just mentioned there, it's very interesting. I just read a book called, or I'm finished reading it, called Finding Ultra, which is about Rich Roll, who is an endurance athlete. And he went, basically, he was also collegiate, a swimmer, but then basically did the whole American dream, got to 40, was like, what's going on in my life? Long story short, became the most amazing endurance athlete like the world's ever seen, to a degree, in some respects. And I showed this to a friend of mine in the gym who's a runner, and he said something to me which is super interesting. He said he hadn't read the book, didn't know who the guy was, and he goes, I'm telling you, this guy, to have achieved what he's achieved, particularly in endurance, has got significant demons in his past that allow him to draw upon to propel him forward. I'd never thought of it like that. But actually, this guy was a raging alcoholic. The guy in the book, right? It's true story, Rich Roll, and lots of other things as well. But that was the main thing, and like self-worth, etc. And yeah, it's amazing actually when you think about it. And like Mike Tyson, all these people, like a lot of particularly individual sports, these people have drawn upon all the negativity that was around and put it into positivity, which is very hard to do, but it's so powerful. And if you can't draw upon that, like they can't really substitute that really. So in some ways, having difficulty is a blessing. And I think you probably would have that, understand that as well. I've had it my own way. And now I look at it having come through and like, now I appreciate I'm so much grateful for things, and have such a better view and a better person for it. Absolutely. It's not, you can't compare people's stories. Of course you can't. Everyone's got their own trouble and strife. And yeah, I think what you're saying is so true there.
I think it is too. And I'm reminded of that Winston Churchill quote, the Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II, said, if you're going through hell, keep going. I mean, when people are going through hell, a lot of times they want to stop. It's like, no, just keep going. Use that hell to make you a better person, to propel you, farther along the line. And so many people don't get that. You have to have some kind of an experience. I love these people that, go on podcasts. It's like, I'm a 19-year-old life coach. No, you're 19 years old. You don't have any life, unless you've got something major going on, you're not a life coach. You need to get some life before you coach. And we need to use that, our experiences. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So that's number two. Number three is
just to interrupt that, sorry, quickly. Another Winston Churchill quote at the back of that, which also is very relevant here. I could be paraphrasing this, but it's something like, success is when you go from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm, or something around there. Which is absolutely true, and that's what Peter, again, going through hell, like that's part of life, and embrace it, and almost enjoy the process, whether it's losing weight. Like, don't and try and enjoy that part of it, and turn it around into a fuel. I think it's a great way to live. So yeah, onto your third truth.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Failure is part of success. If you have success and you've never failed, I don't think you have success yet. No. You have to overcome things to get there. I think you're absolutely right. That's a great quote. Number three is, for me, is kind of a legacy truth. And it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And when I, found out I was going to lose my leg and I had these tumors in my lung, I went with my wife to the mortuary, to the cemetery, to the church, and I planned my funeral. And, I go on these podcasts and I talk about continuing to move forward and motivation. And so, when I planned my funeral and people find out about it, they're like, don't you think that's kind of defeatist? And I would look at them like, well, last time I checked, I think we're all going to die. I don't think anybody's working on a cure for life right now. So, it was like, everybody dies, but not everybody really lives. And there was a great Native American quote that I heard years ago that went like this: when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life. And I think that's the important words in this quote. Live your life so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. So that's number three. And then finally, number four is pretty self-explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And the way I look at that is, someday my pain is going to end. It may end through surgery. It may end through medication. Quite frankly, it may end when I die. But if I quit, if I give up, if I give in to pain, then pain will always be a part of my life.
Mm-hmm. No, it's so interesting. And so I suppose you've, with what you've mentioned now, you actively are a motivational speaker. Like, what is that line of work you're doing, and how can people find more out about you, I suppose?
Yeah, I was the brilliant guy that started a motivational speaking business in 2019, right when this COVID thing was hitting. So probably not my best business decision. So most of what I do now, because I am still being treated for the tumors in my lungs, and I do that every third week. So I go for an entire week to the hospital, and then I have 2 weeks off. And during that 2-week period, I am a guest on podcasts to sort of tell my story and see if it can make a difference in other people's lives. I wrote a book back in 2020. So I have this blog called Motivational Check, and I put up a new thought for the day every day. On Mondays, I put up the Monday morning motivational message, which a lot of times is a video or story, but I know people's time is at a premium. So if you need a quick hit of inspiration or motivation, go to Motivational Check, check out the quote for the day or the video, and then get on with your life. And so motivationalcheck.com will get you to me. You can get the book through Amazon there. You can get access to my social media sites. You can leave me a message, whatever you want. So motivationalcheck.com will get you to me.
And you have alluded to it, but if you were to have a legacy, we will have a legacy, of course. What would you want it to be?
I guess at this point in my life, nobody's going to name a street or a building or a basketball court after me or anything like that. And you know, somebody asked me how I wanted to be remembered. I'm like, I don't really have any great desire to be remembered. I just want to be, I want to put as much, at least now, as much goodness, as much positivity, as much motivation, as much love back into the world as I can with whatever time I have left. And if that's my legacy, I'm good with that.
I think that's a really lovely way to end today's conversation. And I really wish you the best, and obviously hope everything goes well with the continuous journey and fight and battle that you have with cancer. And yeah, I will put the links in the description and for the book and for where people can find you. And I really thank you for your time, Terry. I know it's very valuable, particularly in your space. And yeah, thanks for sharing your story with us.
Well, thanks for having me on, Charles. I always say it's good people like you that allow me to come on and tell my story. And hopefully, you know, between our conversations, we're going to make a difference in somebody's life. And if we do that, today's been a good day for me.
I'm so with you. So with you.